I have quite a few conversations with young people, as you can imagine, about the purpose of life. People asking, where is my life going? What is God's plan for my life? How can I discover my true vocation? And these are really important conversations. But somewhere in the conversation, I often end up reminding people of something equally important, that God has already given you a purpose, and that your vocation is not just something you will discover next month or next year, it's something you're called to live right now. And what is this fundamental purpose? Well, it's what Jesus speaks about in the Gospel today. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you must love your neighbour as yourself. To love God, not just with our mind, oh yes, I believe there is a God, but with our heart and soul as well. To put him at the centre of our thoughts and affections and desires. To remember, as St. Paul says in the second reading, that he is a living God, and we are called to a living friendship with him. And to love your neighbour as yourself. To give the same care for your neighbour, whoever they are, as you give for yourself. To worry for them as you worry for yourself. To give time to them as you give time, very naturally, without a second thought, to yourself. Jesus wasn't the first to teach these commandments. In fact, he's quoting from the Old Testament. He's quoting from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. But he was the first to put them together into a pair. The first to say that they depend on each other, and the first to say that everything else depends on them. As Jesus says, the whole of God's law hangs on this twin commandment. And put it another way, the whole meaning of your life and mine is fulfilled in the keeping of them. If you want to know your purpose, if you want to love God, it needs to flow into a love for your neighbour. If you want to love your neighbour with the deepest possible love, it needs to flow from your love for God. Just to give one example of this trying to make our faith in God and our love for others connect. On Friday I was at the London School of Economics, the LSE, for the opening of their fascinating new Faith Centre. And Dr. Rowan Williams was there, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, speaking in a discussion panel about the economic crisis. He made a beautiful and a powerful point. He said, it's very hard to question capitalism or the market economy. It's very hard to really question these challenging questions, these situations, because our whole intellectual and cultural framework is based on the idea of ownership. Ownership. So if your starting assumption is that everything is a form of property and everything is owned by someone, then it's almost impossible to get outside this framework and critique it. And he said, this was his challenge. Remember, we're in the LSE. He said that we need to discover the meaning of the word sacred in order to overcome this trap that we can get in. We need, and I'm paraphrasing him a bit, to introduce some notion of radical otherness, of the divine, to have some transcendent framework to our understanding of this creation that is around us, that allows us to step back and say that the material world is not just a form of property to be owned. That's not the starting point. No, it is a gift. It belongs, first of all, not to you or to me, but to God. It's His creation. And knowing this relativizes the meaning that we give to capital, and it gives a deeper meaning to the value of everything that exists, and above all, to the value of each human person. So the idea of God or the sacred in this proposal is not meant to oppress us, to interfere with ordinary human thinking. It's not the God squad coming into the LSE with a big stick saying, wake up and do the religious thing. No, this discussion about the divine and the sacred, it's meant to liberate us to take a new perspective on the meaning of economics. So this is just an example, and I didn't agree with everything that Dr. Williams said, but I like the way he's trying to see how our conception of God can help us to make sense of life, of the creation, and then of our responsibilities. And he's also saying implicitly that the absence of God from our life and from our thinking, even about economics, has practical implications. Let me just provoke you a bit more personally, not just a lecture from LSE. I think that very often, as Christians, we are practical atheists. Practical atheists. We say we believe in God, but very often it doesn't affect how we are really looking at the world and thinking about things. We say, for example, we think, we believe, well, this is my day. And yes, I might say a prayer at the morning and in the evening. So prayer and God is a part of my day. Do you see how that doesn't make sense, really? It's not my day, it's God's day. I'm part of His world. I'm part of His life. It's not that He is a tiny part of my life. If this is the God we're talking about, it's not the living God. And tell me honestly, have you ever had a conversation that goes something like this? You've said to someone, well, I have a friend. She doesn't believe in God, but she's a lovely person. Now, my faith is important to me, but if it's not important to her, that's fine. Well, okay, I'm sure she is a lovely person, and I know lots of lovely people, and I'm certainly not saying that you have to be a Christian to do good or to have a moral code. Of course you don't. But do you see how really that kind of attitude is a type of practical atheism? Because if your faith is important for you and not for others, then you've just turned it into a kind of cultural relativism, or just a personal psychological preference. If you think your faith is true for you, but not true for others, I'd say that really means it's not true, full stop. Because in philosophical terms, to be true means that it's true not just for me, but for others as well. Truth is truth. In more ordinary language, if you say that something is really important for you, but not for others, it shows that it has a very limited importance in your life. Even as Christians, I think, we don't often feel the sadness and even the tragedy of atheism. We take it for granted, almost as the atmosphere we breathe. I don't mean to judge people here at all for their lack of faith. I'm not talking about judging others. I'm talking about our attitude. And to realise what a difference our faith really makes to us, what a blessing it is for us, and what a liberation it could be for other people. That we know that life is a gift and not an accident. And don't others long to know that as well? To know that someone's life has a purpose and a meaning, and how much a difference it would make to our friends if they knew that. for someone to discover that they are loved by God with an infinite love, that they're not alone because of his loving, living presence in their life, so hidden and so quiet, but so real. Wouldn't this change people's lives? To know that death is not an end, but a new beginning, a doorway to eternal life. Wouldn't that give hope to your friends as much as to you? These are not small things, but so often we treat our faith in God very casually, and we speak about God without much care or conviction, or we simply don't speak about him at all. We are practical atheists, and if only we could live our faith more, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of others. Yesterday, I was on pilgrimage with many of you to Canterbury, and we had a wonderful day, lovely sunshine and a fantastic day of activities and trips. And without repeating the whole story, we heard about St. Augustine coming to England to meet King Ethelbert, the pagan king, telling him and his noblemen and his culture, his country, about faith in God, about the hope of heaven, about the love of Jesus Christ, and seeing how that transformed King Ethelbert, his friends, his society, his whole culture, and how that Christian transformation spread throughout the whole of England and has changed our country over these 1400 years since St. Augustine came in 597. Faith makes a difference. Believing in God makes a difference. The second church that King Ethelbert allowed to be built, that St. Augustine built, was here in London. And that church that he built in about the year 600 is built on the very same spot where St. Paul's Cathedral is today. So when you go to London, the centre of London, and when you look at the dome of St. Paul's, you know that you are looking at the witness of Christian faith that has stood there for over 1400 years, at the centre of our country, at the centre of our culture. Did you know, you can fall asleep now if you like, I'm going to tell you something about zoning laws. Yeah? But the building regulations in central London are based on needing to see the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral from various fixed points in the city. And you are not allowed to build a building that gets in the way of St. Paul's Cathedral. So you know the new cheese grater building that's just gone up in the city, yes? That's got one vertical wall and the other is at a strange angle, narrowing at the top. The reason it's built like that is not to please some fancy architect. It's so that when you step back from that building, you can still see through and see the dome of St. Paul's. The whole of London is designed around this view and these building and zoning laws. Part of me is maddened by this because I love big skyscrapers. And I would love London in one way to become a New York or a Dubai or a Shanghai. But another part of me thinks, isn't it amazing that we have built into our city and our culture and our architecture the fact that the temple of the Lord is meant to be at the heart of everything we do. That the tiny church that St. Augustine built, that King Ethelbert allowed, is still there in the form of St. Paul's. And for all sorts of complicated historical cultural reasons, we've decided that it's important that whatever we build, wherever our culture goes, we need to have that vision of God and of faith at the centre of our city. It might be a quirky London thing, but it reminds us how much we need God at the centre of our lives, at the centre of our culture. And if we do, what a difference it makes to everything else.